Craftsman days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Right now, get a free select tool when you buy the Craftsman V20 2-pack battery kit. Whether it's the backyard, the bathroom, or beyond, Craftsman has the tools to help you power through and get the project done right. Because DIYing is unpredictable, but your tools shouldn't be. Shop Craftsman at Lowe's today. Valid through 6/18 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Craftsman days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Save $100 on the Craftsman V20 6-tool power tool combo kit, now at $199. No matter what the project is, Craftsman's high-quality, high-performance products empower you to build on. Stop by your nearest Lowe's store and check out the full line of Craftsman tools today. Valid through 6/18 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Weirding Way Media.
Hello and welcome to the Filmumentaries podcast. I'm Jamie Benning, your host for the next hour or so, and you're listening to episode 127. Before I get on to the subject of this episode, I just wanted to let you know that I'm currently running a GoFundMe to get me and my co-director, Patrick Tyndall, to Martha's Vineyard for late June, which will be the 50th anniversary of Jaws. And the subject of our documentary, Joe Alves, is going to be there, along with a few other key personnel from Jaws and Jaws 2. Also Jaws 3D, I guess, because Joe's there. And it's a real opportunity for us to shoot the final chapter of our documentary on Joe. It really will kind of be amazing to shoot Joe and interview Joe in the place that he originally recce'd in 1973. And obviously shot the film in 1974 down there in Martha's Vineyard. You know, it's probably going to be Joe's last visit to the island. He's now 89. It's the 50th anniversary, and it just feels like an opportunity that we can't miss. As you may have heard before, both Patrick and I have sunk quite a few £1,000s into this project already, and we can't continue to do that. So we'd really appreciate your support with this GoFundMe. Now, you don't get any perks, unfortunately, because you can't do that on GoFundMe. But what you would get is the satisfaction of helping us finish shooting this documentary about Joe, about his legacy. It's not just about Jaws, it's about all the other things he worked on. Disney, he worked for Disney, he was on Sleeping Beauty, he was on Vertigo, he worked with Hitchcock many, many times. He worked with John Carpenter, Escape from New York. He worked with Spielberg again on Close Encounters, and in fact in his early days in the TV stuff that Spielberg did on Night Gallery, Rod Serling's Night Gallery. And it's so fantastic to have Joe with us and have Joe's archive. That is all shot. We did that over 2022 and 2023. We went out in March and both those years and shot that. We then shot multiple interviews with his collaborators. You know, the dream is to get Spielberg as well at some point, and hoping also Dean Cundy at some point, because he worked with Dean on Escape from New York. But yeah, this opportunity's come up. I had a job booked in Los Angeles, an live athletics television job booked in Los Angeles, and the client were happy to fly me to Boston and fly me out of LA. I would get the internal flight, so that meant I was being paid whilst I was there, and the flights were covered. So that was the only way I was going to do this. Unfortunately, I then got cancelled off that job because they changed the spec of the job and I was the last one in, so I was the first one out. So I went from having my flights covered and being paid whilst I was there to none of those things. So I decided to start a GoFundMe, and within, just a matter of hours and a few days later, managed to raise a pretty damn good amount of money actually. But if you know anything about Martha's Vineyard, it's extremely expensive. We've had to spend on the cheapest accommodation available on the island for the week. It's cost us over £3,000. We then have to get flights on top of that. Patrick also needs, extra baggage for the kit. Then we have to get a hire car, and the costs are escalating. So anything you can do to help us fund it, whether it's sharing it or whether it's sending us, $20 or £20, or as one person did, £1,000, which is incredible, then we'd really appreciate it. We really need to make this happen, and we really need your support. The people who love behind the scenes stories and the people that want to see this film get made. We need your support. So I'll leave the link in the show notes. But if you go and type in GoFundMe and Not Your Average Joe, or GoFundMe and Jamie Benning, you'll find that on the web, I'm sure. And thank you for anything you can do to help us. Do really, really appreciate it. In this episode, I'm speaking with film journalist and author Max Evry, whose book, a masterpiece in disarray, David Lynch's Dune, an oral history. Yes, Nigel Smith, I do need the copy back. When you finished it, I lent my copy to Nigel, friend and former podcast guest. Anyway, takes a deep dive into one of cinema's most fascinating and famously flawed sci-fi epics. It's got interviews with over 60 contributors, including key cast members and crew, and even David Lynch himself. Max pieces together a complex, intimate portrait of how this hugely ambitious project came together and kind of fell apart as well. We talk about the challenges of writing this book, what it took to earn the trust of so many contributors, and why the oral history format felt like the best way to capture this story. Max also reflects at the end of the conversation on his own experiences with creative disappointment and how that helped him better understand David Lynch's journey through Dune. So here's my conversation with Max Evry, and as usual, I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Max, thanks for joining me. When did this book first click as an idea? And did you always intend for it to be such a weapon? I mean, this thing is huge.
Yeah, Jason Bourne could kill somebody with it. Yeah, it's a big book. It's 560 pages. It was actually right before publication. We had to very quickly cut 100 pages out of it.
Right.
Because the spine would have broken, my publisher said.
So gravity was going to be a big impact on your book.
And that was good. That was good because like all that was like filler. It was like didn't need to. It was like just like too academic. Didn't need to be there. Like you can look all that stuff up on the internet. And it was like, yeah, it made. I think it made the book more entertaining and more, even if 60 pages. But yeah, like where did it come from? It's weird because like Dune has been like one of those movies that's been around, like in my life as like a kid of the 80s. It was like I would go to yard sales looking for Star Wars figures, and I would pick up a Sardu car and be like, I don't remember this from Star Wars. But yeah, like and I think I first read the book and saw the Lynch movie sort of simultaneously when I was in middle school. It's like age 11, 12. And I was a little befuddled by it. And, but like I felt like every like 5 or 6 years, I'd kind of pick it up and be like, all right, let's give it a shot. And every time I did, I was like, oh, there's something here. It's a little interesting. And also it doesn't help that there's two sort of competing cuts out there. There's the long TV edit, which is awful. is dreadful, and that one is actually much harder to sit through because it's very discombobulated. And then there's the theatrical cut, which I certainly prefer, because it it was supervised by Lynch, and it does move very, very fast, and it has an interesting pace to it. And then basically the opportunity to do a book came about, and it was like, originally it was supposed to be part of like a library of books of thin 150-page books about cult movies. And and I threw a bunch of names out. I was like, oh, how about The Keep? How about Used Cars? How about The Fog? And but Dune, it had this. We knew Dune was going to be having a moment with the Villeneuve movie, so we're like, oh, let's ride those coattails. And then what happened is the more I delved into it, the more I was like, oh no, this needs to be a real book. Like this needs, deeper research, deeper, try to get more interviews, try to fill in some of the holes in terms of, just what happened. There had never been a proper autopsy on this movie. So yeah, I think over the it wound up being about 2 years. It was supposed to be like 7 or 8 months. It was supposed to be 150 pages, and it wound up being 2 years and 560. And the publisher originally said, oh, you get 2 or 3 interviews, I'll be happy. I wound up getting like 60, 3 dozen of which are actual like core people from the movie. And so it was just this beast that evolved. I mean, it was originally intended to be 150 pages. I was paid for it to be 150 pages. So it was definitely a labor of love, and but it paid off, because I think that I've heard from so many people like, this is the book I've been waiting for all my life.
Yeah, no, it certainly feels that way. And just before we hit record, I said, I think a measure for me is always when I think, wow, I should have done this, or it should have been done by now. And I'm glad you took that mantle and went with it. Yeah, I think the oral history approach is really great, because it sort of puts you, I feel like you're sort of immersed in the making of the movie as it's being made, because people are recounting these stories, but you're hearing those multiple perspectives around a particular thing, whether it's the visual effects or the casting. I mean, that early stuff with the casting is just great. I really enjoyed that. There's something tantalizing about Dune, because it's, it became something that it wasn't initially intended to be, perhaps, and it's got this mystery surrounding it and all of these stories, that we've heard. And obviously Kenneth Godwin's 70 hours of footage that's been lost to the midst of time. There's so much mystery surrounding. I think oral history really is the best approach. Was that always your intention? Did you have interviews like already with your work as a film journalist that kind of led you down that route? Was it always meant to be an oral history once you reached that sort of initial point of writing it?
It wasn't an oral history until over a year into the writing process.
Right.
Because originally I had so few interviews that I was just going to lay them in there. I was just going to I would edit them, but they would just be Q&As. And they would be single Q&As, and and I only had like 8 or 9 initially, and then there's sort of 2 phases of the book. There's BD and AD, before David and after David.
Yeah, right.
So like once I got David involved, R.I.P. He really gave me a book, like, because it's like once he gave me the time, like it all of a sudden it unlocked the doors.
Yeah.
And,
how did that come about? Because he's notoriously sort of quiet about this movie. It's not something he likes to talk about. Obviously there were those things later on where he was talking about George Lucas offering him Return of the Jedi and sort of turning that down, and all of that kind of, you can almost see that trajectory that he's going in there, that he's got this, he's got this big film in him somewhere. But yeah, he doesn't really like to talk about it. So how did you manage to convince him? Was it the amount of people you'd already interviewed that kind of made him feel like he was the last piece, or what was it?
I think so. Yeah, I think the fact that I'd already had, a number of people
Mm,
like Alicia and Everett
mm,
McGill and Naomi Watts I spoke to briefly. It's like, yeah, I tried to get as many people sort of from the inner circle as I could, but I never intended to get him. I just assumed that was not a thing. Like, I mean, I'd already talked to Daniel Griffith, who'd done sort of a kind of a making of for
mm,
Arrow
mm,
video, and he took his shot and he didn't get it, and a lot of people have tried, and yeah, and I think by that point, I really wanted
mm.
Rafaela De Laurentiis, who was the producer, and I think she's actually kind of the unsung hero of the film. I think it's as much her film as it is David's, I will say. And it's funny too. Like, if anybody was ever going to adapt this book into like a mini series or something, or a movie, I would say don't make it about David. Make it about Rafaela. She's the more interesting character. Like, David would be a funny sort of side character, very obviously very important, but like, she was speaking 5 languages, and she was, really holding this whole giant machine together, and
Mm.
really, as you've read in the book, like pulling them out of some real tight spots, fires, equipment breaking down, people having nervous breakdowns and sickness, and just like,
Impounded equipment and all sorts of
yeah.
stuff.
Oh, the bribery that she had to
Yeah.
deal with. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, her story is much more interesting, and I really wanted to get her, and her line to me was, "I'll do it if David does it," and
Mm.
I'm sure she said that thinking I would never get David, and I didn't find David until I was actually looking for Kyle. I
Mm.
was looking for a contact for Kyle, and somebody gave me a contact, and I'm like, "Oh, this is actually David Lynch's person."
Oh,
So
right.
yeah, so then by then I'd read enough about it to know there's certain things you don't want to go into with David. Like, I would never ask him about the Villeneuve movie. I would never, I told them I'm going to approach this in a way that hopefully it will not be unpleasant for him.
Mm.
I'm like, I don't want this to be upsetting. I'm like, I want to approach this in a positive way. And I think I think his people sensed that, I was truthful, and I meant what I said, and yeah, and so I got a little bit of time with him, and I'm,
Yeah.
forever grateful.
Yeah, it really feels like people opened up to you. Considering it's a film that has been considered a failure, people speak so openly about it. I mean, obviously, you're getting people in their later part of their life. I'm sure some of them were in their 70s, 80s, 90s even. But I don't feel like you ever sort of sought out to dig dirt on anyone. If somebody offered a piece of information, it's, you clearly considered whether you should put it in the book or not. I'm sure there were things you were told as well that you haven't put in the book.
Hmm.
How did you go about trying to find that balance?
Well, I'm not a muckraker. I'm not like a National Enquirer or whatever. Like, yeah, there were a lot of things that I was sort of like, there are a lot of people out there who this is the thing they would gravitate to,
Mm,
and I'm like, I'm not interested. Like, I want to know about the making of the movie, and so yeah, and I mean, there are, there's stuff in the book about flare-ups, about, conflicts
yeah.
and things like that, but they're all related to the movie. They're not about, oh, this person slept with this person
Mm,
did
mm,
this drugs or whatever. It's like, yeah, it's like that stuff's boring. And also, like, some of the, for some of the people involved, it's like, you don't want to drag them through the mud, especially when they're being so generous with their time and their memories and stuff. Yeah, so like, yeah, I mean, whatever people gave me on the record I think was fair game, but yeah, if anybody said like, oh, don't put that, I don't want that person to get,
yeah.
I would totally, yeah, and I still have it. Some of it's hard some of it's hard to not talk
Yeah.
about. There's one scene in particular in the film. I can say this because it's broad enough, it's not damning, but like, yeah, there's a scene in the movie where someone is legitimately being injured,
Mm,
and I withheld what scene it is.
right, right.
But now every time I watch the movie, I'm like, ugh.
You wince now you see it. Yeah,
Yeah.
blimey. Yeah, I was thinking actually, like when I finished the book, there's so many great moments in there and so many great things, talked about. Some of those experiences in Mexico, just kind of insane. But I didn't feel there was ever like a clickbaity headline that anyone could draw from your book. It's very dense, it's very thorough, but I don't feel like there's anything like you said, muckraking or anything like that. So I think it would have been easy to do that, and I kind of applaud you for creating something that has got real depth and has a real nice structure to it. I think taking the structure the way you've done it, where you've got like pre-production, production, post-production, and then legacy, and tying it up with some of your thoughts and relating it to projects that you've worked on, and it really brought an extra depth to it. You don't have to comment on that. That was me giving you a statement, right? But one of the questions I did have is about just the depth that you've gone to, the amount of people you've interviewed, like 60 odd interviews, I think you said. What kind of crazy system did you have for keeping track of all that? I mean, was it kind of spreadsheet chaos or like wall of string and Post-it notes? How did you keep on top of all of it?
It's a good question. I haven't been asked that. And honestly, like I think a lot of it was just like making lists, and then just kind of keeping track of it in my head, especially when I was building out the oral history. Yeah, I was like, I think it helped that I structured it in a way that, things, specific lines could fit into specific places. So yeah, and I don't think, and yeah, and basically I would just go through, once I was building the oral history, I would go through an interview and just be like, okay, this could go here, this could go there. And yeah, and then they built out from there. And then towards the end, it actually got to a point where I think I had enough resources that I was either going back to people to fill in holes, or I would actually interview new people. I would be like, oh yeah, I got David Page from Toto, but I don't have Steve Luque there, and this person's talking about Steve Luque there, so let me get Steve Luque there, and I was able to do that. Because I think like you said, I built up enough of a trust with the people where they knew I was writing a book about the movie and not about who fucked who or whatever.
Yeah. I did enjoy Bob Ringwood, particularly. He just, I like the way he speaks so openly, but with a real sort of sense of humor at the same time. Like just those stories about Rafaela sort of tearing up his immigration papers in his passport and him then being an illegal immigrant in America. Just the craziness of the behind the scenes stuff is great, and he tells it with such great humor and clearly a sort of an affection, because you can see his work on those costumes, like I'm sure you've said, fed into his career later, and he knows the importance of that film.
Yeah, no, and it's funny you brought that up. Yeah, I'm sure reading something like that, you wonder what I cut out. You wonder what was too inappropriate to cut out. Bob is wonderful, and like you said, he has enough class to, even if he's being brutally honest, which I think I think he said he has no filter. Like he's just brutally honest about the people he's worked with. He can be very complimentary too. Like he's not out to tear people down. He's just like, this is what happened, and that's something that's refreshing, I think, to read. And I don't think anybody minded. Like nobody complained. Nobody was like, hey, why'd you put Bob saying that? It's like, I think that is also something that speaks to just the production as a whole of Dune. It was very much a family. And they, even though it was a hard movie to make and there were a lot of trials and tribulations, I think everybody looked back on it with fondness. Even Bob said he wishes he could have done Blue Velvet with David. Right. He wanted to strangle him. I think during the making, like they were burning. They made like 1,000 hats that they had to then burn because they didn't shoot the scene. Stuff like that can make you upset.
Yeah.
And I think he's right. I think he's he was angry at David because David let the movie get away from him. And, and some of that has to do with the fact that David, had never made a movie this big. But I also think it's important for people to realize, like, almost nobody had made a movie this big.
Yeah.
I mean, like, this was the most expensive movie in Universal Pictures history at the time. Very few people had made a movie of this, of this scale. Like, maybe Michael Cimino with Heaven's Gate. Even Return of the Jedi cost less than Dune. So there you go.
Probably because it was kind of in-house Lucasfilm, as and they had kind of shorthand with each other, and they had crews already that were carrying from film to film.
Yeah,
but
and
I think
non-union as well.
Non-union as well, of course. Yeah, I think your book really captures well the kind of not only the scale of the production, because like you just said, it's massive. Down in Mexico in Churubusco Studios, and entire sets that weren't seen in the movie, entire performances that weren't seen in the movie. But it also, I think there's some really nice kind of magnification of these tiny little things in Hollywood, in that churn of Hollywood, like the randomness of success versus failure, whether it's on the film scale or whether it's because Dino thinks he's got funny looking lips, or David doesn't like his hair, or whatever. Just these, talking about sort of Val Kilmer and Tom Cruise and all those other actors that were considered. Did you, when you were writing this, did you allow yourself to kind of imagine what the movie would have been with some of those other choices?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Rafaela talks about, she often wonders what would have happened with the movie if she cast Tom, and my answer to that would be, well, look at Legend. Tom didn't help Legend. I mean, like, Tom Cruise, the creature as we know him, didn't become fully formed until Top Gun. Like, that's where he became Tom Terrific. That's where he, just like used all of his assets and, and in what was essentially a Air Force recruitment video. And, and he's evolved too as a movie star and as an actor over the years. But yeah, like, he wasn't, if you look at Tom at that time, like, Risky Business hadn't even come out yet, like.
Yeah, right. He was 18 or something at the time.
Yeah. And if you look at the performance he gives in Risky Business, you can almost see a whole other career he could have gone down, where he's like a little more neurotic, a little more of a character actor, a little bit more like a Dustin Hoffman, in The Graduate kind of a thing, I think, there is an alternate timeline where Tom Cruise is starring in Woody Allen movies and, and stuff like that. And I think, like he just, you have to want to be a movie star. You can't it doesn't just happen to you. You have to want it. You can become an actor, and be in movies, but to be a movie star is a thing. It's like, you don't just become president of the United States, and you don't just become a movie star. And, and I think, and again, I don't know if he necessarily had the same qualities that Kyle had. And it certainly, you can't discount the how simpatico Kyle and David were. Like, it's like he became Lynch's avatar, basically. They look similar, and they have similar backgrounds, in the Pacific Northwest, and that they have, they're both very gregarious and outgoing and friendly, and and I think like David just found his guy, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, and it was interesting to me, the whole casting process where people were thrust in front of David, and he wasn't necessarily getting them to do a read. It was more sort of based on personality and what he could see in them from screen tests, because he was sort of making an assumption that, well, they're actors, so they can act. I can direct them. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing, because you often hear about actors sitting in a waiting room, like going through the sides and trying to figure out the character, and they didn't really have much to work with other than what they knew from the book. And I guess it was of benefit that Kyle had read the book as a teenager and had kind of fallen in love with it, and had kind of quoted it to his friends, I think he says at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, that bit was really interesting to me because it seems to sort of go against what you would expect a big film of that time to have done in terms of casting.
Yeah, and it's interesting too to contrast him with Zach Galligan's story. I was really happy to get Zach
Yeah.
to talk about it because that was a case where he was very similar to Kyle in that he had the same kind of innocence and that same kind of attitude, and he was also a fan of the book.
Mm.
And
It
but
actually was him that was quoting, to his friends, wasn't it? Yeah.
So it's like, it's like it's not just one thing, it's an alchemy.
Mm.
And for whatever reason he didn't click with David, and for whatever reason Kyle did. And and you can't you can't define that. I mean, I guess it's a little like speed dating. But and I think and they also, they really tried to make Val work. Like I think there's a quote from Rafaela, an archive quote, where she said, like, we screen tested him so many times we convinced him ourselves he was the right guy.
Yeah, and it got very close, didn't it?
I mean, he was basically signed.
Yeah.
He was like, it's like, even the casting director's like, what are you doing? Like, he's our guy. Like, we got our guy. Like, why are we going out and looking for more people? And I think that was actually, good intuition, whether it was about his lips or whether it was about, his attitude or the way he related to David, like they, I guess we know from, sort of history that, Val could maybe not be the most user-friendly actor, and in some cases, maybe not all, but certainly some cases, not the most user-friendly. And I'm almost certain that, like, that is part of what David's process was. It's like, do I want to spend 6 months with this person? Like that, and that can be, that can be really important. If you have somebody who has their own agenda, they can derail a production.
Yeah.
So I think he did a really great job of, assembling a group of people who were extraordinarily talented, and all very right for their roles, and also, were able to form a united front.
Yeah, I always think of Dune very sort of visually. I can't really necessarily remember too many of the scenes as such or bits of dialogue, but I can picture every member of the cast because I think they were cast so well and fit so well visually that they always work for me. I think it probably was helped along by that early game on PC where they were rendered again, those same actors in computer graphics, and I played that thing to death. But it's just one of those films that I always have a real kind of sense of the space that it creates in my head. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, I understand the kind of geography of it and the weirdness of it. I remember first time I saw it, I would only have been, I don't know, 8 years old. I saw it a couple of years after its release. And I remember thinking, not necessarily that I liked it, but just that I thought, I like this feeling of this film, It feels weird. And did you always have that kind of relationship with the film, that it felt a little bit on the fringe, and because of that's one of the reasons you enjoyed it?
Absolutely. That's a very apt way of putting it. Like there's I think with so much of Lynch's movies, it is about kind of the feeling they invoke.
Yeah.
Like I guess a good parallel example would be I remember reading years ago, I think it was in Scorsese on Scorsese, where Martin Scorsese talked about how he would you have it on your shelf.
I've got it,
yeah. He would talk about how he would put on like a different Mario Bava movie in every room of his house, and then just walk through his house, like soaking up the atmosphere.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I think you could do the same thing with David Lynch. It's like, like they all feel of a piece. They all obviously have, similar hallmarks and, tendencies and, quirks, and obsessions. And and Dune is no different. That's part of the point of the whole book is, all the people who dismiss it because Lynch dismisses it, It's like, no, 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 no. This is a David Lynch movie
Yeah.
through and through, every scene. There's no like scene that feels like it was made by the second unit director. Like it's all feels like a Lynch movie, and you can kind of just, drift through it and, just be immersed in this world in the same way you would Eraserhead, or Twin Peaks. Yeah, like, yeah, I mean, my particular favorite world, I love Caladan. I love how, everything is kind of made out of wood, and it feels like, you kind of like you're in Twin Peaks
Yes.
a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah, and it's some of it is very cozy. It's a very cozy movie. Yeah, sort of the same vibe when you get into the Sieges with the Fremen. Yeah, and then when you're in, the disgusting Harkonnen, wasteland, yeah, you feel the revulsion, and you feel that it's also fascinating in the same way that Blade Runner is fascinating, like because it's invoking that that very specific mood. Yeah, like these are all things that contemporary Hollywood is afraid to do. Like they don't want to make anything that's distinct. They don't want to make anything that feels authorial, like it came from someone. They want to make something that feels like it came out of a factory. I was listening to an interview the other day with it was an older interview with John Landis, and he was talking about how he had, somewhere within the 2010s, had a meeting with a studio executive where they were, trying to see if he could make a movie for them. And the studio had said, John, the reason I'm not going to hire you to make this movie is because we're afraid you're going to make the movie. So that's the world we live in now. And, and that's what makes Dune, something else, something special. Because, David made the movie.
Yeah. And it doesn't feel like you could say it's this movie mixed with this movie. It just it's Dune. It's its own thing. I've always felt that way. It sort of stands alone in that regard. Just going back to some of the sort of behind the scenes stuff that you dug into in the book. I mean, you talk about the crew and the cast, or the cast being people they want to spend 6 months with or whatever. I've crewed crews for my TV shows that I've worked on, and I'd sometimes have genuinely picked people I get on with better, because I don't want the egos in the way. But they did go down to Mexico, and they were down there for months, and there was sickness, and there's that absurd moment where Dino builds an on-site Italian restaurant to avoid all of the sickness and salmonella and everything. To me, it felt like that's a metaphor for the whole production in a way. Did it feel that way to you?
In the sense that they had to, I think I know what you're talking about, in the sense that like they came to Mexico to save money.
Yeah.
And then they wound up spending more money because they're in Mexico.
Yeah, but there's that thing of having to make good and having to do the best you can within the parameters that have been served to you, because it's easy for everyone to kind of pick holes in the movie, but until you know what went on behind the scenes, I don't think you can fully appreciate what they managed to achieve with the film.
Yeah, I mean, also, in the sense that, like, I believe it was a kind of a negative pickup deal. Like, it was a De Laurentiis movie. It wasn't necessarily a Universal movie. Universal just had a stake in it, and ultimately wound up having some say in terms of the length and the editing, because they needed it to be X length. and because they invested X dollars and had to put more money into it because of shortfalls, then they wound up having more control over it. But yeah, it was essentially an independent production. And because they were in Mexico, it gave them some distance from the studio in the sense that, the studio executives don't want to be in Mexico City. The same thing sort of happened with Peter Jackson when he went to New Zealand to make Lord of the Rings. It's like, the executives don't want to fly out to New Zealand. So in that sense they were insulated to a certain extent. And I also think that's why the first half of the production went pretty smoothly. And then the second half was more rife with like, I think at a certain point they realized they weren't getting Star Wars.
Right.
They weren't, like, oh shit, like, we're in trouble. And I think, I think they were expecting something more like Elephant Man and less like Eraserhead, but they were kind of getting both, and I think the way the De Laurentises made movies is I think kind of wonderful. Obviously, it didn't work a lot of the time, but sometimes it did beautifully. And I think that's a testament to how much leeway they gave the filmmakers and how much support they gave the filmmakers. Like even if things went sideways later, it didn't always feel like a corporate thing. It felt like, as Bob said, it's like, Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney putting on a show, in the barn. I think that's kind of cool. And again, like, one of the reasons why a lot of people enjoyed making the movie, as opposed to, a modern, blockbuster superhero movie or whatever, where, the cast probably feel like they're working at Starbucks.
Did you ever consider, through the process of making the book, to make a sort of visual companion piece or to make a visual book itself? Because that film is so rich in terms of the visuals, and obviously you've been privy to a lot of, casting notes and original drawings and concept designs and photographs of costumes and things. And there's all that lost footage. It feels like, I don't know. That's my question. Did it ever cross your mind to do that? I'm sure it did.
Yeah, I mean, we were limited in the sense that this was an unauthorized book.
Yeah.
And and that's
it's good for that reason. I'm sure if it had been authorized, it would have been a entirely different book. Yeah.
I nobody ever told me, no, you can't print that. Nobody. One person I interviewed asked to read the transcript of the interview, and I gave it to him, and he never sent me anything. So yeah, like there was absolutely no control from anybody except me and my publisher. And my publisher gave me a free hand as well. Like there was nothing, like if anything, I was the one who was saying, let's cut this, let's cut this, let's cut this. Just because I wanted it to be a good book. And you at a certain point you have to put your ego away, and you have to also not think about, oh, I spent so much time on this. You have to just get rid of it. And and I wound up using a lot of that info later on things like I did an audio commentary for the Via Vision Blu-ray of Dune, and and that was 3 hours long. And I had to, that stuff came in handy. And and then in terms of visual things, like, I mean, I did create like a YouTube video of the alternate ending that was never shot, which I assembled with storyboards from Apogee.
Right.
And I did that, myself, not through my publisher, as we didn't want to get sued. We didn't want the book to get pulled. But then I was able to then make that video, and a lot of people saw that video. And then I also worked with Molly Rin, who was an actress who played the character of Hara, and almost her entire part is removed from the movie. And there's one scene in particular with her and Alia and Jessica in the siege. It's an amazing scene. It's almost like something from Scanners. It's really frightening.
You put that out about a year ago or so, didn't you?
Yeah, I put that out about a year ago. Yeah, and we actually, me and this other guy, Matt, we actually took the VHS that she had, which luckily was it was letterboxed, so
Yeah.
it was the full image, but it was really scratchy and it was from a work print and it was VHS. So we had it scanned into 4K, and then we went in and completely cleaned it up and restored it, and we even added in the blue eyes, and so stuff like that. Those little projects, even though I wasn't getting paid to do any of it, but it was like I felt like it was part of the process of preserving the film, and sort of disseminating the idea that Dune is more than the sum of its parts. That it is almost an unfinished film.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's like, because there's so much stuff that went to the wind. There were so many plans that David had that didn't come to fruition. But once you know about all those things, it definitely helps give you a better idea of what the movie could have been. Although I do have to say, I think even in its compromised, flawed current state, the theatrical cut is still an incredible film, and it's still one of those things that, like, it continues to give me things. It continues to unveil itself to me.
Yeah.
The more I watch it, and it's I can't think of any movie I saw recently like that works like that. I don't think I'm going to get the same thing. I don't think I'm going to get anything new from Captain America: Brave New World 20 viewings in that I didn't get on viewing 1.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend earlier about how when you're a kid, every movie you see for a period of time, every movie you see is the best thing you've ever seen. And then at some point, that stopped happening. I mean, it's kind of sad to even think when that might have been for me, but I'm sure it happened along the way in my 48 years, where you just see a film and you think, yeah, it's never going to be as good as X, Y, or Z. But yeah, I think there's something about being a certain age and seeing a film like that really kind of sets something deep in your mind, and then it kind of develops over time as you go through different periods of life. The film means different things to you. And the thing is, Max, now you are part of that legacy as well. Do you find, or do you feel you have a responsibility or an obligation to sort of be this custodian, and as new information emerges, is there any temptation to kind of make a special edition of the book?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, obviously I'm talking to you, and it's been, almost 2 years since the book came out.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like, I'm not, I enjoy talking about it. I enjoy being part of the legacy. I'm part of the Wikipedia page now, which is fun. And obviously, I'm on, I'm on that Blu-ray. I'm on a bunch of things. And then I guess to get to what you were saying, we were going to do a paperback edition that was going to be a little bit more expanded. And then we realized people really loved the hardback.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, we just kind of went in, made some corrections, because when you come out with a book, people love sending you emails with like, "Oh, this isn't right." And I do listen to them, and I went in and I fixed some things, and I added a few more little cameos. Like I added some quotes from Matthew Vaughn and Joel Hodgson from Mystery Science Theater. There's a great quote from new quote from John Sayles in the second printing. But it's mostly the same book. We couldn't really add a ton of stuff because then it would mess with the formatting. So like we like the second edition has a few little things. But yeah, I have actually done a few more interviews for what I hope will eventually be the paperback. And and we also have an audiobook version that's coming out. I've been talking about it for so long because I'm working on it for over a year. It's just had a lot of production problems. And but for all the people who thought the book was too long, or there's a lot of little cul-de-sacs that we go down in the book, which I love, and which a lot of people actually loved. Like I talked to Bill Sienkiewicz, the guy who drew the comic book adaptation. I talked to the guy who's collects all the toys and knows everything about the toys. I
Yeah.
talked to a guy who wrote an episode of Chuck that had a sandworm in it. You know, I mean, it's like, you know, I go down all these little cul-de-sacs, and you know, and part of that was to show, like, you know, no matter what David says and no matter what anybody says about the movie, it has a legacy and it has impacted people, and it has, you know, like, you know, made an impact, and there's a larger sort of even industry around the movie, you know, with, you know, things like, you know, the action figures, their new action figures from the movie that just, you know, came out a few years ago,
Yeah.
you know, like, there's people still doing prints. There's still, you know, it's like it lives on, you know, it continues to, you know, be a thing. And then you have also the Villeneuve movie, which has been the greatest gift to Dune 1984, because now there's something to contrast it with. You know, now you can look at what Villeneuve did, which is 180 degrees different from what David did. And also has value. But, you know, yeah, like you can look at it and you can say, oh, well, what David did is actually really interesting, you know, because Villeneuve's is more like the book and Lynch's is more like Lynch.
Yeah, it leans into the weird a lot more, doesn't it, Lynch? But yeah, it is great to have that contrast. Now, I don't want to spoil the end of the book for people who I'm hoping are going to pick it up and read it after we've had a chat. But you talk about your passion project, and you know, it kind of collapsing in different degrees and not working out in the way that you wanted. Do you think that give you that sort of personal flop, as it were, gave you a better appreciation of what David did achieve with the film, or the struggles that you had in trying to make the movie? It's sort of that last moment in the book really gives a kind of, it really reminds you of the emotional thrust of the book. I think, you know, that this is something that somebody's trying to achieve. Films are always something that somebody's trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And in sharing a similar experience, albeit on a smaller scale, did you find that useful as a perspective?
Are you talking about the sci-fi movie I made when I was younger?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, nobody's asking me about that. You're the first person. So yeah, no, that was definitely something I realized, like towards the end of writing it. I was like, oh, this is why I'm so invested in this. You know, it's because I have experienced this on a much, you know, smaller, more personal scale, but like definitely, yeah, like I understand what he went through. I understand, you know, putting years of your life into something and then, you know, it doesn't get received very well, or it doesn't do.
What was the name of the film again? Remind me.
That movie was called Blue Lollipop.
That's right, Blue Lollipop.
And yeah, it was sort of a follow-up to another sci-fi movie I made when I was in college. And that one had been successful. That one had been gone to festivals and stuff like that. Yeah, it was yeah, you know, stuff like that happens, and then, you know, like again, it's similar to what David went through also, in the sense that, you know, you try to carry the lessons through. You try to you know, like you know, get something from it as well, like, you know, oh, this didn't work because this, well, let me try something else. Yeah, in terms of David, you know, I think it is sad that we didn't get more movies of the ambition of Dune. You know, he made, you know, obviously, like, you know, stuff like Twin Peaks is very expansive and has the same elements of world building and all that. But yeah, you know, he was an incredible fantasist.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, I mean, he could have certainly gone down a path, you know, much more like, I don't know, like Tim Burton or Terry Gilliam, you know, and you know, really taking us into, you know, he loved exploring other worlds and, you know, creating these unique you know, sort of fantasy scapes. You know, his script for Ronnie Rocket is very indicative of that. Yeah, and I think you had I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his name. The guy who did the costumes and stuff for Return of the Jedi.
Nilo Rodis Jamiro, yeah.
Yeah, you had Nilo on, and Nilo tried to make Domu with David.
That's right, yeah.
In the 90s, another movie that begins with Dune that begins with D that only has 4 letters in it. And I don't know what's going on there, but
there's something going on, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would have been fascinating. My God. Yeah. So it's like, I don't think it's not like he made Dune and then he never wanted to do science fiction again, or he never wanted to do something fantastical again. He talked about doing this movie. God, I'm also forgetting the name of it, but it was like about these creatures that live in a carpet. It was like an animated movie. He spoke about this fairly recently before he died, and I one of the things I uncovered after the book was I uncovered his script for Dune 2, and and that script has a scene with these creatures turning themselves small and going into a carpet. So clearly, like he was investing himself into the world of Dune, and then the world of Dune gave him stuff as well. I certainly think that the way Herbert approached an ever expanding narrative and an expanding sort of mythology certainly had an impact on Twin Peaks. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's easy for people, or it appears to be easy for people to dismiss Dune as part of David's filmography, but we wouldn't have the movies that we had subsequently if he hadn't gone through that experience. I mean, you always learn lessons, whether they're positive or negative ones, don't you? What are the lessons that you've sort of taken from writing this book? Was it, well, shit, I'm not going to do that again, that took too long, and or was it, wow, I can do this. Yeah. I can do this, and now I'm going to pick this movie, and this movie.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my next book will never be as long as this one, and I won't spend 2 years on it.
It's not going to be 150 pages, though. We both know that.
No. But I think the thing it taught me was just, the more you just look, the more you'll find. None of the things that I discovered were like that hidden. Like a lot of this stuff was just out there. And it was either about asking the right person or going to the right place, or, just putting 2 and 2 together. It's like, it's interesting because I think the fact that people look at it as this great, work of investigative journalism is a testament to how shitty the world of journalism is.
No, but I think as you say, the information is out there, but it's until you put it alongside each other, different quotes from different people, and put it in some sort of context and some sort of not necessarily like an invented narrative, but a lineage, until you put it in some sort of order, it doesn't reveal itself, I mean, even from a very simple point of view, and this is me talking about a book I put together with a friend of mine, which is just the timeline of the production of Return of the Jedi. It's literally on this date this happened, and on this date this happened, for the 40 years that the film had existed at that point. And people were going, wow, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. Well, it's from this book, and it's from that book, and it's from this interview and that interview. But until you see these things side by side in a particular order, in a particular way, where you've got maybe conflicting opinions, or, like in the production of Return of the Jedi, one day at Elstree, people were trying on Ewok costumes, and it was the same day they shot the first scene that was deleted, and things like that. And people are like, oh, I get this real sense of the structure of the film and how it was made and how big it was and what was going on. And your book does that really well. Like I said at the start, it really puts you kind of there, I think, even though the voices are talking retrospectively for the most part. I really did get a sense of the size of it and the complexity and the chaos and the minutiae and the scale and everything. I think that's what's really valuable about an oral history, and about your book in particular.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, I think that this, I've been I've been in the world of movie journalism for 2 decades now.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that I've learned doing this book and also doing like audio commentaries for places like Kino Lorber and Arrow, is as soon as you stop looking at the usual places like Google search and Wikipedia and IMDb trivia, like you might be able to scratch the surface with those, but they're not the be all end all. And I hate to say it, but most of the movie journalism you read online, even from trades like Variety and Deadline, they're getting most of their information from these places. They're not going back and looking at old newspapers, old magazines, old, archive interviews, even videos. There's even, videos on YouTube, that you can see vintage stuff. And it's like, nobody's doing the work. No, they're just relying on aggregate information, and that's going to kill history.
And it's only going to get worse because people are using AI to dig up these facts that aren't always facts, and then it's just going to end up in this kind of pool of brown sludge, and that's going to be
it's awful. Yeah, I had to recently just get rid of Google because I'm sick of seeing wrong information at the top of my searches. And it's like it's not even like willful misinformation like you might get on X. It's just like wrong. It came from, like you said, sludge. It came from some algorithm, and they're putting things together that don't belong together. And and so I hope that can die before it does too much damage. But just in terms of regular movie journalists, like seriously, like stop just using Wikipedia and IMDb and Google. Like it's not helpful.
There's nothing more valuable than talking to the people that were there at the time. I'm writing an article at the moment about ILM's animation history. So I'm going all the way back to like the drawing, R2-D2's electricity bolts around him and rotoscoping lightsabers up to, Who Framed Roger Rabbit and Rango, and then on to like Transformers movie they did last year or year before. And there's no way I could research that online. There's absolutely no way. There's just not enough information. And what I'm loving is just speaking to these people and digging out these little bits of information that don't exist anywhere else, and then having that as a record for hopefully people to reference in the future and actually find the truth.
And I think that's something I'm definitely going to carry through on whatever I do, going into the future. Like even just recently I just did a commentary track for Kingpin, and like there's just like a factoid on IMDb trivia that's like Will Ferrell is giving is one of the people yelling in the background of the bowling scene at the end. And I'm just like, I did like marginal research and found an interview with Will Ferrell where he's like, oh yeah, I didn't do that. It's like, but it's still out there, and it's like you have to correct it and and tell people like, no, don't just believe everything you read.
I think that's a really good place to end it. Thanks for your time today, Max. I really appreciate it. I love the book. I'll mention it again. A masterpiece in disarray, David Lynch's Dune, an oral history. You could, if it had not sold, you could definitely have built a house for yourself out of these, but thankfully it's an excellent book, and I'm sure it's selling well, and I hope it continues to sell well, because we need more books like this. We really do.
Thank you. And I'm sure we could have talked more. I'm sure we could have gotten into like some of the visual effects stuff, because I know you're into that. And it's all in my book, but
it is all in the book. I'm aware that my podcast meant to be all sorts of different jobs and disciplines in the industry, and I ended up interviewing like 75% VFX people. So that was deliberate on my part in this conversation, at least.
No, I love what you do, and I've listened to quite a few episodes, and
cool.
I really enjoyed it. And
good.
And thank you for having me on.
Oh no, very welcome, and thanks for your time. Thanks for listening to my chat with Max Evry there. His book, A Masterpiece in Disarray, is really worth picking up. It's been out a while now. It took me a while to find it. Thank you to one of my followers that pointed me in the direction of it. I can't remember who it was offhand. But yeah, appreciate that. I really did enjoy the book. So whether you're a fan of David Lynch, Frank Herbert's Dune, or just love detailed behind-the-scenes looks at filmmaking, creativity and chaos, I guess, then yeah, definitely worth picking it up. You can find a link to the book on the show notes and on filmumentaries.com, along with some extra resources Max mentioned during our conversation, including his restored VHS footage. If you're enjoying the podcast, do consider supporting it via Patreon. That's patreon.com/Jamie Benning. Or if you can't do that, please share it with a friend who might be into this kind of thing. Every bit of support really helps keep these conversations going, and I do really need to grow that Patreon following. I'll be back soon with another episode later this month, but until then, take care. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.